Justin found out on a Tuesday afternoon. He was not looking for the information. He was not in a conversation about Selena, not in a conversation about the wedding, not in any context that would have suggested what was coming. He was in the middle of something entirely different, a meeting, a conversation, an ordinary afternoon that had given no indication it was going to become anything other than ordinary. Someone said something. It was not said as a revelation, not delivered as news or as gossip or as something the person thought Justin did not know. It was said in passing as a reference, as the kind of detail that people mention when they assume the other person already has the information and is simply being reminded of it. Justin did not already have the information. He heard it. Something in him went still. He let the conversation continue around him while the specific weight of what he had just learned settled in his chest. The way significant information settles when it arrives unexpectedly, when there is no prepared place for it and it simply has to find its own. Selena Gomez had cried at his wedding. Not before it, not after seeing coverage of it, not in the private processing of the weeks that followed. At the wedding, on that day, somewhere in the world, while Justin was in a church in South Carolina saying the most significant words of his life, Selena Gomez had been in a room and she had cried. Justin sat with that for the rest of the afternoon. He did not call anyone. He did not text Hailey. He sat with it the way he has learned to sit with significant things, quietly, privately, turning it over until he understood what he was actually holding before deciding what to do with it. The wedding was September 30th, 2019, a church in Bluffton, South Carolina. White dress, vows, family, friends, the gathering that marked, for everyone who attended, the real moment, the one with ceremony and weight and the specific quality of something being formalized in front of witnesses. Selena was not there. She was not invited. That was never a question or a controversy. It was simply the obvious reality of the situation. You do not invite the person you loved before to watch you marry someone else. That is not cruelty. It is clarity. What Justin had not known, what had not occurred to him to wonder in the years that had passed since, was where Selena had been that day, what she had been doing. Whether the day had registered for her at all, or whether she had moved through it the way people move through difficult days, by staying in motion, by keeping the hours occupied, by not sitting still long enough to feel the specific weight of what was happening somewhere else in the world. He had been in a church in South Carolina saying the most significant words of his life. He had been looking at Hailey. He had been present in the specific way that people are present on the most important days of their lives, aware of everything, storing everything, living in the moment so completely that the outside world does not register as anything other than background. He had not thought about Selena. He had not wondered in that moment or in the years since what that day had been for her on the other side of the distance that separated them. And now, on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of something else entirely, he knew. Like this right now, if you already feel the weight of what's coming, because who told Justin is the part that nobody expected. The information had existed in the world for years before it reached Justin. That is the thing that matters most about how this part of the story works. Selena had cried. Someone had been present for it. Someone had witnessed the specific moment, wherever it happened, whatever she had been doing, however the day of someone else's wedding had arrived in her world and found its way past whatever defenses she had constructed. Someone had seen her and had known what they were seeing and had carried the information forward. For years, without delivering it to Justin. Not maliciously. Not because anyone was protecting something or managing something or keeping something from him strategically. Just in the way that certain information does not find its moment. It exists. It is known by someone. But the right moment to say it to the right person never arrives, and so it continues to be carried by the people who know it without reaching the person it concerns most. Until a Tuesday afternoon when it arrived in passing in a conversation about something else, said by someone who assumed Justin already knew. He did not already know. He finished the conversation. He drove home. He sat in the kitchen with the specific quality of someone who has received a significant piece of information and is letting it settle before deciding what to do with it. Hailey came in. She looked at him. She said, "What happened?" He said, "Someone told me something." She said, "What?" He said, "Selena cried at our wedding." Hailey was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." Justin looked at her. He said, "You know." Hailey said, "I've known for a while." He said, "How long?" She said, "Long enough." He said, Why didn't you tell me? She looked at him. She said, because I was waiting until you were ready to hear it the right way. I wanted you to have enough context to understand what it was before you learned that it happened. Comment now. Do you think Hailey was right to wait? Or should she have told Justin immediately? Justin sat with that. He said, you've been holding this the whole time. Hailey said, yes. He said, since when? She said, since before we talked about the journal. Justin looked at her. He was doing the calculation, the timeline, the conversations, the specific order of things. If Hailey had known about Selena crying at their wedding before the journal conversation, before the Ryan Good kitchen table, before all the other pieces, then she had been holding it as context the entire time she had been assembling the picture. It had been part of what she already knew when she sat across from him and asked the questions she asked. He said, that's why you weren't surprised when I started talking about that period, when I started trying to understand it. Hailey said, part of why? He said, because you already knew the other side of it. She said, I knew that it had been real for her too, not just for you, not just historically, real in the specific way that makes a person cry at a wedding they aren't attending. Justin was quiet. He said, who told you? Hailey said, it doesn't matter. He said, it matters to me. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Benny. Benny had told Hailey. Not recently. Not as part of any of the conversations this story has documented, not during Coachella, not at the kitchen table, not during any of the moments where Benny had functioned as the bridge between the two sides of this story. He had told her much earlier than any of that, before the journal, before Hailey had begun the deliberate work of assembling the full picture of that period, before she had called Ryan Good, before she had pressed record, before any of it. He had been present when Selena cried. He had seen it. He had filed it in the specific way Benny files things, carefully, privately, without sharing it with anyone until he understood the right moment and the right recipient. He had decided that Hailey was the right recipient, not immediately. He had sat with it for a while first. He had thought about what it would mean for Hailey to have this information, whether it would help or complicate or add something she could not yet use. He had thought about who Hailey was and how she would hold it and what she would do with it. He had believed she would hold it right, that she would do something useful with it when the time came, that she would carry it as context rather than as a wound. He had been correct. She had held it for years. She had sat across from Justin in all those kitchen table conversations knowing that on the day she married him, somewhere in the world, the person he had loved before had been crying. She had carried that not as a complication but as information, as one more piece of the full picture she was quietly assembling about what that chapter had actually been. She had been waiting for Justin to be ready to hear it. On a Tuesday afternoon, someone else had delivered the information before she had decided the moment was right. Justin sat with all of this. He said, Benny told you before any of this, before the journal, before everything. Hailey said, yes. He said, and you held it. She said, I held it until you were doing the work, until you had enough context to understand what it meant without it becoming something that complicated everything instead of clarifying it, until the word transformed existed between us, until you understood what that period was well enough to hear what it had been for her too. Justin looked at her. He said, what does it mean? Hailey said, it means the chapter was real, on both sides, not just in your history or hers, in both of them at the same time, even after they were no longer together. She cried at our wedding because something real had existed, and you've been trying to understand what that something was ever since. She looked at him. She said, the crying doesn't change what we have. It confirms what you've been learning about that time, that it was real, that it deserved the work you've been doing to understand it. Justin said, you've been waiting to say that. Hailey said, for a while, yes. Subscribe now. Every layer of this story continues on this channel. What Justin did with this information next is coming. He called Benny that evening, not to confront him, not with anger or accusation or the specific displeasure of someone who has been kept from information they believe they had a right to. Justin had been in enough kitchen table conversations by this point to understand why Benny had done what he had done and when he had done it. The timeline was clear. Benny had told Hailey early, before any of the work had begun, because he had believed Hailey was the right person to hold it, and Hailey had held it through all of it, through every conversation, every revelation, every piece of the picture, and had waited until Justin was ready. He called Benny to say something that needed to be said directly. Benny picked up. Justin said, "You told Hailey." Benny said, "Yes, a long time ago." Justin said, "Before any of the rest of this." Benny said, "Before the journal, before the Ryan conversation, before all of it." Justin said, "Why?" Benny said, "Because I knew she would hold it right, and I knew you would eventually need someone who had been holding it before you found out. Someone who already understood what it meant so they could help you understand it too." Justin was quiet. He said, "She held it for years." Benny said, "Yes." Justin said, "And she waited." Benny said, "She waited until you were ready. That's who she is." Justin said, "Yeah." He was quiet for another moment. The evening was quiet around him. Then he said, "Did Selena know you told her?" Benny said, "No." Justin said, "Does she know now?" Benny said, "Not yet." Justin said, "Don't tell her." Benny said, "Okay." Justin said, "Some things are allowed to stay where they are." Benny said, "Yes. And some things are allowed to be known without needing to go any further." Justin said, "Yeah." They talked for a little while longer. Nothing significant, just the ordinary conversation of two people who have said the necessary thing and are now sitting in the aftermath of it. Then they hung up. Justin went back to the kitchen where Hailey was. He sat down across from her. He said, "Benny said you waited until I was ready." She said, "Yes." He said, "How did you know when I was ready?" She said, "When you started doing the work. When you started trying to understand that period instead of just carrying it. When you began to be able to look at it clearly instead of around it. That's when I knew that when you finally heard it, it would land as information instead of as a wound." Justin looked at her. He said, "It landed as information." Hailey said, "I know." He said, "Thank you for waiting." She said, "That's what I'm here for." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Outside, the evening was doing what evenings do, shifting the light, cooling the air, moving toward the specific quality of late night that settles over a house when the day's significant things have been said. Justin said, "She cried at our wedding." Hailey said, "Yes." He said, "That chapter was real." She said, "Yes." He said, "And now I understand it." Hailey looked at him. She said, "Now you understand it." They sat together in the quiet kitchen for a while after that, not talking, not processing anything further, just sitting in the specific presence of two people who have arrived together at a place they had been moving toward for a long time. The chapter had been real, for both people, on both sides. Justin understood it now. And he understood it because the woman sitting across from him had held the final piece of the picture for years, waiting for exactly the right moment to let it land. There is one more detail that the person close to the situation confirmed. Selena does not know that Justin knows. She does not know that Benny told Hailey years ago. She does not know that Hailey held it through every kitchen table conversation. She does not know that a Tuesday afternoon conversation delivered the information to Justin through a path nobody had controlled. She does not know that Justin called Benny that evening. She does not know that Justin told Hailey. It landed as information. She does not know that the chapter, the full chapter, both sides of it, her side and his, has now been understood by the person she once loved, that he understands not just his side of it but her side, that he knows now the specific weight of what September 30th, 2019 had been for her. She does not know any of it, and Justin has decided that she does not need to. He said to Benny, "Some things are allowed to stay where they are." He said it about Selena not knowing that Benny had told Hailey, but the same principle applies to everything. Some knowledge is complete in itself. Some understanding does not need to be delivered back to the person it concerns. It can simply exist in the mind of the person who has received it, in the quiet of a kitchen at the end of an evening, in the specific presence of two people who have arrived at understanding together. Justin understands. Hailey already understood. Benny carried it from one to the other at exactly the right time, in the right sequence, with the specific patience of someone who knew that information delivered too early becomes noise, and information delivered at the right moment becomes clarity. He delivered it at the right moment. And Selena is living her life with Benny, building something real, not knowing that on a Tuesday afternoon, the person she loved before finally learned the full shape of what that time had been, for both of them, at the same time. on opposite sides of the same chapter. Real. What do you think Justin felt when he heard that Selena had cried at his wedding? Leave your theory in the comments. I will pin the most compelling one.